one of the most prestigious magazines in all of Korea, and Jiwon worked as a fashion editor. But today, she was happier than ever. She had finally achieved her dream. Today, she was moving into her dream apartment. Although she was in debt for now, she didn't mind. She ran into a neighbor who, upon hearing which apartment Jiwon would live in, shared an interesting bit of gossip. Apparently, 2 men lived next door to her, and rumors said they were a couple. Some even said they were adoptive parents. Jiwon was curious, but for now, the most important thing was to enjoy her new home. The next day, she woke up late, and it just so happened to be the day she would meet the new chief editor. They said he had previously worked for Vogue in France. His name was Shin, but many called him David. Shortly after she arrived at the office, the new boss called for a meeting. When Jiwon saw him, she was stunned. The new editor-in-chief was the same man she had met 3 months ago in France. 3 months ago, Jiwon had taken a trip to France to immerse herself in the culture and see the landscapes. One night, however, a pickpocket almost stole her passport. Shin had saved her from that situation. He caught the thief and returned her passport. Jiwon was amazed by how handsome he was, though his voice had been stern and not very kind. He had said, "It seems you're as innocent as you are foolish. From now on, keep your bag close to your chest." Jiwon thanked him for his help, but she had been so distracted by his good looks that she didn't even realize he had insulted her. On impulse, as she watched him walk away, she stopped him and asked him to have a drink with her. And after that, well, she had her first one-night adventure. How could Jiwon forget? She had traveled to France after finding out that her ex had cheated on her. She was open to new experiences, acting impulsively without worrying about anything. But she doubted that the man would remember her. There was no denying it, though. Her boss was incredibly attractive. Her boss caught her attention, asking if it was common for her to arrive late. Jiwon tried to explain herself, but Jiwon had no filter. He bluntly told her that her outfit today was terrible. Jiwon tried not to give it much thought. Just because she had spent one night with him didn't mean anything. Besides, he was her boss now. But her boss wanted to make one thing clear. As a fashion editor, she should have a direct impact on trends. But today, she didn't look the part. As he passed by, he said in French, "Look at yourself." Later, Jiwon left work feeling frustrated. Running into her one-night stand had been bad enough, but now he was her boss. Just then, someone grabbed her arm. It was Jiwon, who had been waiting for her. He wanted to ask her something personal. How does it feel to leave without saying goodbye? Jiwon didn't understand until he mentioned that he had a photographic memory. So he remembered everything. Besides, how could he forget? She had left without a word. Back then, Jiwon had panicked. She had never done anything like that with a man before, and didn't know how to handle it, so she ran away. But she didn't tell Jiwon this. She simply apologized. He didn't care much about that anymore. He was happy to see her, but wanted her to understand that what had happened between them was a private matter. After all, he reminded her, he wasn't made editor at Vogue for nothing. The truth was, what had happened between them in France had been special. They had even shared many things in common, but it was something she needed to forget. Later, as Jiwon headed up to her apartment, she met her neighbor, Ha-jun, who was with a little girl named Sol. Jiwon was stunned by how handsome Ha-jun was, but when she realized they were going to the same floor, it dawned on her that he was one of the men she had heard about, the adoptive parents. She said out loud how much she admired them for being so brave and supportive, then hurried off to her apartment before Ha-jun could correct her. The following night, the CEO of the magazine held a banquet to welcome the new editor-in-chief. Jiwon was getting ready, but as she rushed out of her apartment, she accidentally bumped into a child. She quickly reached out to catch him. But before Jiwon could fall, her boss swooped in to rescue her. He quickly picked up the child and, in a gentle voice, asked if he was okay. This shocked Jiwon even more. How could he be so sweet with kids? But after handing the child back, he returned to his usual cold self, warning Ji-woon that she was still walking a fine line. Later, everyone was eating, but in the middle of it all, Ji-woon's phone rang, catching her boss's attention. She excused herself and answered the call. It was her ex, So-min, drunk and begging for forgiveness. Furious, Ji-woon told him never to call her again. But out of nowhere, Ji-woon appeared, snatched the phone from her and told the cockroach never to call Ji-woon again, and if he had a problem, he could come meet them at the hotel. Jo-min asked who he was talking to, and Jo-min calmly replied, her future husband. Jo-min was left speechless, while Jo-min walked away as if nothing had happened. Ji-won couldn't think straight. Seeing him and hearing his voice made her remember France. That day, after drinking with him, Ji-won had offered to walk her back to her hotel, but Ji-won couldn't trust a stranger, though the fact that he didn't push her made her trust him more. She caught up with him and invited him to her room. For Ji-won, she was the first woman who had ever made him cross such boundaries. Meanwhile, Ji-min returned home, where everyone assumed he was in a relationship with Ho-jun, but the truth was they weren't a couple. The little girl, Sol, just called him Daddy, and he didn't care about the rumors. The only thing that mattered to him was seeing Sol happy. Weeks passed, and the team prepared for the November edition of the magazine. The big boss, Ji-min, was waiting for ideas, but everyone presented lackluster suggestions, that is, until Ji-min proposed something. With Firefighters' Day approaching, she suggested hiring real firefighters and creating a photo shoot with fire to raise awareness about fire hazards. Ji-min immediately asked everyone to leave with their useless ideas, except for Miss Chu, the only one who contributed something valuable. Once they were alone, Ji-min started acting a bit bold, asking her to come closer, reminding her of that night. That night in France, Ji-won had rushed back to her hotel and jumped into the shower, not because of what they did, but because she was scared. What had made her invite a stranger to her room? Maybe it was the heartbreak, being in a foreign country, or the fact that this man was incredibly handsome. It had driven her crazy. A while later, she came out of the bathroom and asked if he also wanted to shower. He did. Afterward, they drank and drank until Ji-won lost control. She started telling him about her breakup and how her ex had cheated on her, but as she stared at Ji-won's handsome face, with the alcohol making everything seem even more perfect, she lost her composure and asked him to kiss her. Before things went further, Ji-won asked, "Do you really not have a girlfriend?" Ji-min replied, "No, not all of us are like your ex." With that, Ji-won decided to have a one-night stand with someone she thought she'd never see again. Later, Ji-won was heading back home and bumped into Ha-jun again. She asked him how his partner and their daughter were doing. Ha-jun recalled that Ji-won had told him not to confirm or deny anything, to just let the rumor of them being a couple continue. After all, they didn't care what people thought. So, Ha-jun simply replied that they were doing fine. They chatted for a while about work, and Ha-jun mentioned he was a doctor specializing in liposuction. After the conversation, Ji-won went home, but she still hadn't told him her name. However, his flirty smile gave her a bad feeling. Meanwhile, Ji-min arrived at Sol's grandmother's house to pick her up, bringing her favorite flowers. Jejin's favorite. He still remembered her, and it felt like any moment she would walk out to greet him. He knew he could never forget her. Later, as Ji-min drove Sol home, the little girl told him not to cry. He wasn't crying, but it seemed she could sense his emotions. He gave in and comforted her as she cried, not wanting her daddy to be sad. Ji-min reassured her that he wasn't crying, so she shouldn't either. He knew Sol was just like her mother. They arrived home, and Sol had already fallen asleep. After tucking her into bed, Ha-jun and German talked. Ha-jun mentioned that he had met their new neighbor and that she'd already heard the rumor about them. They joked about who the husband was, with Ha-jun suggesting German play the part while he would be the wife. But Sol was only Ha-jun's daughter. Ha-jun also reminded Ji-min that he needed to let go of Jejin. It had been 3 years since her death, and it was time to let her rest in peace. Just then, Sol woke up, having had a nightmare. She asked what was wrong, saying she saw her daddy crying again. Jian tried to calm her down, saying he wasn't crying, but Sol insisted that if he wanted to cry, he should. She didn't want him to hold back for her sake. This touched him deeply. Her heart was so sweet. The next day, Jian arrived at work, but to her frustration, the cockroach, her ex, Seo-min, showed up, demanding to talk to her since she hadn't been answering his calls. Jian was frustrated because she had done so much for him, and she wanted to get away before she lost her temper, but just as he grabbed her arm, her hero, Seo-min, appeared. He warned Seo-min that he was the man Jian would marry, so he needed to leave immediately. Seo-min, overhearing this, judged Jian, accusing her of getting engaged so soon, only 4 months after their breakup. But Jian fired back, telling him that after 5 years of dating, she never really knew him. The argument finally ended, and Seo-min thanked the cockroach. After all, if he hadn't cheated, Seo-min would never have met Jian. With that, they walked away together. At that moment, the idiot grabbed Seo-min, but Seo-min, lowering himself to the guy's level, told him, "Get lost, idiot." After that, Seo-min took Jian by the hand. She didn't understand why he was doing this for her. According to him, it wasn't for her at all. It was just to get her to invite him for a drink tonight, and this time he'd pick the bar. He wanted to go somewhere peculiar where no one would judge him for what he did. They agreed to meet at 8 p.m. That night, they entered the bar, and all the men were staring at Jian, likely because she was making sure no one approached Jian. Jian was curious why Jian was now answering all her questions. Back in France, he hadn't been like this. He seemed different. The reason, as it turned out, was because tomorrow was Jijin's birthday, the hardest day of the year for Jian. It was difficult for him to pretend, so he invited Jian, knowing she wouldn't ask him why he was feeling that way. Jian tried to comfort him, but Jian took the chance to tease her, saying he didn't want anything from her today, reminding her that she had left him traumatized by abandoning him after their night together. Jian responded that this time she just wanted to cheer him up. She didn't fully understand why, but it seemed like he needed a bit of encouragement. Thanks to Jian and Sol, Jian felt a little better, so he thanked her. After that, they went their separate ways. The next day, Jian ran into Hirachell and Sol. Sol asked where her husband was, and Hirachell told her that Jian had been drinking last night and was still at home, sleeping. Jian was surprised that she still hadn't met him, and Hirachell was tempted to tell her that they weren't actually a couple, but he decided not to say anything. After saying goodbye, Hirachell told his daughter, who was still sleeping, that maybe it was time for him to start dating again. Later, Hirachell was at work when Jian called, furious that he hadn't woken him up. But Hirachell wanted to teach him a lesson. Every year, Jian behaved the same way, just because it was his sister's birthday. As the days passed, Jian learned a tough lesson from her boss. He asked her opinion on an outfit for the magazine's cover. She said it was fine, but when he mentioned he wasn't convinced, she quickly agreed with him, which angered him. If this had been an interview, she wouldn't have been hired. She needed to learn to have her own opinion. The work days went by and the weekend arrived. Jian spent it baking and relaxing. Meanwhile, next door, little Sol had a fever. Hirachell rushed over to Jiwan's apartment with Sol, asking her to drive them to the hospital because Sol was very sick. Thankfully, it turned out to be just inflamed tonsils and the scare passed, but Hirachell felt guilty. He was still learning how to be a father. After putting Sol to bed, he thought about his sister's words. She had always intended to raise Sol on her own, knowing she had everyone's support, and didn't need the father. But the day she passed away, he made a promise in front of her photo that he would give Sol a better life. Then Jian arrived, frantic, but Hirachell assured him Sol was okay. Hirachell told him he'd been so scared that he asked the neighbor to help them. But at the same time, Hirachell was furious. Where were you? When you came back from France, you promised we'd raise Sol together. Jian apologized, but Hirachell asked him why, as a doctor, his hands were trembling like that. Jian realized that the two of them were only pretending to be okay. But deep down, both Hirachell and Yeomin were suffering from the loss of Jejin. Hirachell couldn't stop trembling, and Yeomin grabbed his hand, asking him to calm down. In that moment, Yomin realized that if someone saw them like this, the rumors would only get worse. And they did. Because their neighbor saw them. To Yomin's surprise, it was Jian, the famous neighbor who had cheated on her husband. Jiwon quickly understood the relationship between the two. Hajun explained to Yomin that she was the neighbor who knew about the rumors and whom he hadn't had the chance to clarify that they weren't actually together, but they were still holding hands, which only made Jiwon more suspicious. Yomin pulled Jiwon away to talk. She was furious and didn't want to hear any explanations. She couldn't understand why she always ended up with men like this. That comment stung, because in her mind, Yomin hadn't respected their relationship. Jiwon started accusing Yomin of everything, not understanding why she kept getting involved with cheaters. She believed Yomin and Hajun must be in a long, serious relationship, especially since they had adopted a child together. Jiwon felt horrible, thinking she had been part of deceiving Hajun. She wasn't mad that Yomin had cheated. She was mad because it all felt wrong. Jiwon told Yomin they should leave things as they were for Seol's sake, but as far as she was concerned, their personal relationship was over. She walked away, but Yomin hurried after her, telling her to be polite. It takes two people to have a conversation, and he hadn't even spoken yet. He explained that yes, he and Hajun were raising Seol together, but they were just friends, not a couple. He added that if she didn't believe him, he couldn't force her to. Then he handed her his coat, telling her to go home so she wouldn't catch a cold. The next morning, Hajun wanted to explain everything to the neighbor, but Yomin didn't think it was necessary. However, seeing how persistent Hajun was, Yomin realized he didn't want to clear things up for the other neighbors. He wanted to do it because it involved Jiwon. Hajun had been on the verge of telling her everything when the doorbell rang. When Haijun saw who it was, he knew they were in trouble. It was Haibon, Haijun's older brother, a lawyer and the only person in the world who could really get under Yomen's skin. They quickly opened the door, and Yomen immediately understood why Haibon stressed him out so much. He was so imposing. Right away, Haibon made Yomen do push-ups, but with little soul, he was nothing but pure sweetness. That day, Haibon had brought everything they needed for a barbecue. They started asking about Haibon's wife, who works for the government and is always busy. When Haijun asked if everything was fine in their relationship, Haibon gave him a stern lesson about minding his own business. Meanwhile, Seol started playfully hitting her uncle, and Haibon found it adorable. On the other hand, Jian had been thinking it over, and since she had baked some sweet macarons, she decided to offer a few to her neighbors. Just as she was about to knock, Jimin stepped outside and saw her. She offered him the macarons, and in return, she was invited to join the barbecue. They quickly introduced themselves, but soon enough, both Jimin and Haijun were competing for Jia's attention. Jaibon noticed immediately and told them to show good sportsmanship from now on, as fairness and generosity would be essential in any competition they faced. A few days later at work, Jia found herself in an argument with the photographer. She had asked for photos of firefighters that captured their hard work and dedication, but instead she was getting photos of sexy firefighters, which wasn't the concept she wanted. The photographer refused to comply until the big boss arrived. The boss reminded the photographer that he's paid a salary and that the least he could do was adhere to the concepts he was given. The photographer began to complain, but the boss, now irritated, deleted everything they had done and told them to start from scratch. Later, Jia stepped out of the building to rest for a moment on the sidewalk when she saw a call from the cockroach, her ex. She didn't answer, but then he suddenly appeared in person. Jia wanted nothing to do with him, and he told her he had broken up with Hai, which didn't interest her in the slightest. She walked away, but he yelled after her, "Stop pretending to be strong." Jia didn't want to cry over him, especially not a man like him, but her tears began to fall. He tried to apologize for what he had done, but he got the scare of his life when a car jumped the curb, seemingly about to run him over, but stopped just in time. The driver? None other than Jimin. He reminded the cockroach of his earlier warning. The next time he saw him bothering his girlfriend, he'd be in serious danger. Jimin then helped Jia into the car and drove her away. But before leaving, Jimin warned the cockroach that next time he wouldn't stop. They were already in the car and Jimin was going to take Ji out for a meal, but then he asked why she had left him alone that time. Jia, exhausted, responded by asking when he would stop bringing up what happened in France. They soon arrived at a beautiful place, and the owner, Junil, was a good friend of Jimin. Junil introduced Jia as his colleague, but out of nowhere, he started telling Junil that he's bisexual, is in a relationship with Jun, and even had an affair with a woman in France. Junil told him to stop being ridiculous, insisting that Jimin and Jun are a couple. Jimin turned to Jia and asked, "Now, do you believe me?" Jia realized he had brought her there just to prove this point, but she didn't understand why he kept saying she should believe him. Getting closer, Jimin told her he didn't understand either. He would let anyone else misunderstand the situation, but he hated that she believed something that wasn't true. Meanwhile, Jun's mother was looking at childhood photos of her kids. She had a best friend who had a child at the same time as she did. She remembered her friend fondly, but it was a shame she had to leave, leaving her young son behind at just 10 years old. Jimin's parents had died in an accident, and Jun's mother had suffered deeply because Jimin's mother was not just her best friend, but like a sister. At her funeral, she had promised to take good care of Jimin so that her friend could rest in peace. To this day, she still saw Jimin as one of her own children. At that moment, she called Jun, asking him to arrange a dinner to celebrate Jem's return from France and also to invite Haibon. The next afternoon, the family gathered for the reunion. Jem arrived and everyone was already waiting. Haijun's mother was like a mother to him, and soon Haibon's wife, Mrs. Jiang, also joined them. Of course, Haibon's father, who also treasured Jem, was there as well. They soon began eating. What started as a lovely reunion quickly turned dark. Jun's father demanded so much from him, pressuring him to raise little Sol properly. But now that Sol was his daughter, Jun had no intention of letting anyone force her into anything she didn't want. That's how her mother would have wanted it. After this confrontation, everything fell apart. Everyone went their separate ways, even Haibon's wife, who apparently had to return to work, leaving her husband behind once again. Meanwhile, Jimin returned to work that evening and was surprised to find Jia still there, working late. He started watching her, noticing how much passion she had for her job. Initially, he had a bad impression of her, but the more he observed, the more he realized how talented she was. Realizing he had been watching her for a while without her noticing, he quickly called out to her. Since she was finishing up, Jimin suggested they grab a drink before heading home. They went to the boss's office, where they began drinking. Out of nowhere, Jia told him, "I'm ready to listen to your story." But for Jimin, this wasn't necessary. He just needed a little comfort. As if under a spell, Jia moved closer to him, and to his surprise, she kissed him. The night began after Jia had been drinking heavily with Juming. She arrived at his house to drop him off, and he was completely drunk. However, like an angry wife, Jung was upset and told Jia it would be better to just leave him on the street. Still, he thanked her for bringing Juming home. Jung then told Jia that she should rest and hinted that he'd like to invite her to dinner sometime. Jia took this moment to ask if it was true that he and Juming weren't a couple. Jun responded, saying that if they were a couple, he wouldn't be with her now, so they were just friends. This relieved Jia a little. On the other hand, Jun put Juming in his room, and Juming muttered, "Jun, stop pitying me, you idiot." The next morning, Jia was heading to work, and there was Juming waiting for her. He pretended not to remember anything, but Jia knew he had a photographic memory. He even told her he didn't recall anything from the previous night, which complicated things, especially since Jia had comforted him, and now he didn't even remember it. Jia was annoyed, but as they left the elevator, Juming slyly said, "Yesterday was better than France." Jia now understood he remembered everything. Later that day, Jia was organizing everything for the company event when she had to listen to Kiva X, the office gossip and troublemaker, go on and on. He was already creating nicknames for the new boss, calling him Taipan, one of the most venomous snakes, and with no antidote for its bite. Not bad. Kiva kept talking until the boss himself approached and overheard the rest. To avoid getting fired, Kiva X was tasked with inflating balloons. The boss then asked Jia if he should forgive Kiva, and she said yes, so the boss told Kiva X that if he still had his job, it was thanks to Jia. That evening the event began, and everything went smoothly. But Jia, with her beauty, caught the attention of some charming men, though she hated flirtatious types and ignored them. At one point, Editor Choi sent Jia to get some surveys from her car. As Jia returned, those guys who had tried flirting with her earlier found her again. They thought they'd get another chance to charm her, but as soon as she got in the elevator, these two idiots stopped it. Minutes passed, and the boss noticed that Editor Choi was leaving. He asked her what was going on, and she explained that she had sent Jia to retrieve the surveys. But it had already taken too long, which scared him. Meanwhile, these two idiots were abducting Jia. Fortunately, the boss arrived just in time, and before anything bad could happen, he quickly knocked one of them down. However, he got distracted when he saw how Jia was, and the other guy took the opportunity to get up and strike him. Jia saw this, but soon lost consciousness. When she woke up, she was in the hospital. Jumi was injured but reassured her that the two men were much worse off. For now, she needed to rest, and then they could press charges against those two. A few days later, Joming asked Jia to come with him to meet H. Bo, who gladly accepted the case. He was one of the best lawyers, and Jia didn't have enough money to pay him, but Jabon would charge her a small fee of $30. He was even willing to help her for free, but since she wasn't happy with that, he only charged a small amount. Jia's gestures made Jabon think of someone in his family, his sister, Jian. The following night, Juming visited Jia. He brought her some fried chicken, which he always bought for Seoul, but he hoped to see Jia tomorrow at work. When he arrived, Jia invited him in to eat together. He agreed, but when they sat down, he let her eat alone, and it felt awkward, like being watched while you eat just isn't comfortable. As they talked, Jia thanked him for helping her hire lawyer Shin, who seemed to be very close to Juming. She then asked about something Shin had told her, that she resembled the lawyer's sister, Jian. At the mention of the name, Juming was stunned. He quickly said goodbye and left. He went to the park, where he thought about the woman he once loved, Jian. She had always been so sweet, and he loved being near her. But for Jian, Juming was just her little brother. She lived her life with optimism and excitement, making him feel so many beautiful things. Yet he never had the courage to confess his feelings, especially because Haijun's family had raised him as one of their own. He couldn't give in to his desires, afraid that if things went wrong with Jian, he might lose the only people who had been like family to him. At that moment, Haijun called him, worried because Jia had come asking about him. Juming had left his apartment in a hurry, and Jia had told him that she had mentioned Jian. He probably felt affected hearing about her. Then Juming asked if Jia resembled Jian for him too. The silence was his answer. Yes. In the beginning, Juming didn't understand why he had been so drawn to her in Paris. But now he understood. That's why he always tried to protect her. That's why he felt butterflies in his stomach when he saw her. He felt guilty for what he had done to Jia. In just a few minutes, Jia, who had been looking for him desperately, arrived, and that truly drove him crazy. 3 years ago, in the winter, Jimin passed away in an accident, just like Juming's parents. He regretted so much not confessing his feelings to her because maybe she would have loved him as much as he loved her. But that's how his intense love ended. When he saw Jia arrive and noticed the cold, they both returned to the building. However, as they were in the elevator, Juming clarified that he wasn't crying. Jia then asked for the lawyer Jaibon's bank details, as she hated owing anyone anything. Juming thought to himself, "She really does resemble Jimin." When they reached the floor, he took off his jacket and handed it back to her before she left for home. Meanwhile, Sol and Haijun were welcoming Juming. Sol told her dad that her other dad ate all the chicken and didn't leave any for her. After putting Sol to bed, Haijun and Juming sat down to talk in the kitchen. It became clear that Juming seemed like a nagging husband to Haijun, But then, Juming began to open up. He wanted to know if it was true that Jia resembled Jiming. This was something Haijun agreed with, as Jia was very similar to his sister. He thought that Joming had also realized this and had opened up to Jia for that reason. But the truth was, Jimin had never noticed this connection. For Haijun there was no problem, but for Jimin there was. Unconsciously he saw Jimin in Jia, and he had fallen for her, which only caused him more pain. He had suffered a lot because of the cockroach, and now he was about to hurt Jia too. He felt like the worst person in the world, but Haijun couldn't understand what the problem was. Then Joming asked Haijun what it felt like to have a family. Haijun thought that was ridiculous. He already had a family. But for Joming, Haijun's family was his family too, and it seemed like Haijun didn't see it that way. The next day, Jia received a call from her mum, who was thinking of sending food with Juming, the one person Jia didn't want to see. After hanging up, Jia realized someone was waiting for her. Juming. Once in the elevator, he told her he had been waiting for 30 minutes and wanted to ask if he could watch her for a few days. After that, he promised he'd explain why. 3 months ago, he had a stable job in France, but he chose to take a job as a runway model just because he missed his home country. Plus, Haijun wanted help raising Seoul. That day, he had decided to stroll around Paris and enjoy the time he had left there. It was then that he saw her. She passed by him and by accident stepped on his foot. But he didn't realize it. Then he found her again in another place. Without thinking, he started watching her until he noticed someone trying to steal her wallet. He intervened. Back in the present, the week for the magazine's Runway release was approaching. It meant hard work, even with extra hours. Though Jie kept thinking about what Juming had asked her, she didn't understand why, out of nowhere, he decided to watch her. He was always near her, wherever she went. One day, Jia and her co-workers were having coffee in the company cafeteria. Out of the blue, they started talking about the boss and what he might be like in a romantic relationship. They thought he was surely imposing, but just then the boss arrived. He overheard everything and approached them. Since Director Choi was the one talking, the boss clarified that she wasn't his type, but he would give Jia a chance, even though Jia wasn't interested. After that, he walked away, thinking, I have to admit, she even rejected me in the same way. Things were starting to get out of control, and he even started observing her responses. Meanwhile, Jaibon finally met with his wife. The two were so busy with their work that they hardly saw each other or spent time together. There was no chemistry between them anymore, so Jaibon wanted things to change. That afternoon, out of nowhere, he proposed having a baby, which shocked her. They had been married for 5 years, and for her it wasn't the right time. When she heard this, Jaibon got angry. She always prioritized her work, even working extra hours, and it seemed like she had stopped being affectionate, not even calling him by his name. He asked, Baba, are you seeing someone else? When she reacted negatively, she simply handed him what she had brought. After that, she left, and Jaibon didn't know what to do. It had been a year since he discovered that she was seeing another man, a researcher who worked with her, but he hadn't confronted her yet, afraid she would ask for a divorce. On the other hand, Jia was leaving work, and it was already very late when she ran into Joming. He asked, Why are you leaving? You've only been sleeping for 3 hours, and now you have to go back? But she replied that she'd rather rest in her bed, even if it was just for half an hour, which excited Juming. He told her, You're not like her, so at least today, from what I observed, you're not like the one I thought you were. After that, he left, leaving her completely confused. The following days, after a long work day, Jian called his mother to take care of his little soul for the night. He had received a message from his ex, Sonyeon, telling him that she was getting married. Some time ago, he had broken up with Sonyeon because he needed to take care of Sol and didn't want to burden her with that responsibility, even though she was eager to care for Sol. Supposedly, he had distanced himself because Sonyeon's parents weren't happy with the situation. In short, he sent her away to fulfill her parents' wishes and marry someone they chose. Now, the woman who used to be his love was getting married. So, in this moment of confusion, he decided to clear his mind by watching a movie at the cinema. And right there he ran into Jia, who was also planning to watch a movie, a horror one. She invited him to watch it with her. She noticed and thought to herself how handsome her neighbors were. Maybe she had done something right to deserve such company. They continued watching the movie, and Jia acted very brave. Afterward, as they were leaving, he offered to drive her home, but she preferred to walk since she had gained a few pounds from eating so much. He jokingly said he was a liposuction specialist and could offer her a treatment, to which she laughed and replied that she didn't need it because she was still very slim. They ended up going in the same car, and Jia thought to herself how different he was from Jia Ming. Both arrived at the building, and Jia Ming, who had just arrived, saw them together. He stayed watching and realized that he wasn't the only one interested in Jia. The next day, Jia had to give something to the boss, who, it seemed, was in a bad mood. As Jia Ming had predicted, he didn't keep his personal life separate and asked Jia how the movie with Haijun had been. He even concluded that Jia seemed to like sweet guys. But at least, he thought, she should give him some time too. Days passed, and one night, unexpectedly, the cockroach discovered where Jia lived and showed up at her place, drunk. Jia went outside because he was causing a huge scene. She wanted him to leave, but he insisted on apologizing until she finally hit him. He was so drunk he was even about to vomit, and just then, Jia's hero appeared. Ming, starting by taking out the trash. But the more he hurt him, the worse it got. Eventually he vomited, and unfortunately it was all over Ming. Poor guy. Meanwhile, that same night, Jaibon arrived home feeling lost, not knowing what to do with his life. He started drinking heavily, and when his wife arrived, he felt a surge of anger. To make matters worse, he noticed a different scent on her. It seemed like the perfume of someone else had rubbed off on her. The next day, like the foolish cockroach he was, he ended up sleeping on the balcony, freezing. He thought he was in Jia's house, but he wasn't. He was at the house of Jia's future husband. Envy consumed him as he watched the beautiful people around him. That's when things started to spiral out of control. Jun called his brother and asked if they could arrest someone who had broken into his house. Of course, this idiot hadn't entered voluntarily. But when he heard that he could face 2 years in prison for it, he panicked and ran off, thinking he wouldn't pursue Jia anymore. When he saw her, he apologized and left, as though his soul was being dragged away. Just then, Zhou Ming appeared, visibly upset, unable to understand how someone like Jaibon could have spent 5 years with that fool and not given him a chance. Meanwhile, Jinyon Yang was meeting with her husband. Jaibon wanted to know when she had been seeing someone else. She told him that she had known for about a year, or maybe even longer. He didn't know that she had been seeing him for 3 years. He asked when it had all started, and she explained that it was on May 6, 3 years ago, when she lost their child. She told him she was trying to be a good wife now since her job was stable, but before, she didn't have time for her. She had suffered after losing the pregnancy, and even though he had heard her crying in the bathroom, he never bothered to ask her what was wrong. She asked him why he had never shared anything with her. The truth was, when she tried to talk to him, he would tell her he didn't have time for anything. Once, she asked for just 5 minutes, but he told her to let him rest and give him space when he came home. It felt like he was tired of her. Maybe she had some fault in all of this, but she wasn't the only one. Later, she left. That evening, Jinon met up with the person she had been seeing. She told him that Jaibon had found out about them, but he couldn't understand their situation. For her, it was just an affair. They had never been intimate, but the fact that she had a connection with another man was enough to call it cheating. She went out drinking with him, had dinner, and even texted him when she needed someone. To Jinon, her marriage was over. She and Jaibon had grown distant, but she didn't know when it had all fallen apart. That night, Jia came home to find that her husband had already packed and was ready to leave. He handed her the divorce papers and said they should end it peacefully, unless she wanted him to report her for having an affair. She immediately signed the papers and he left. She wanted to talk to him, but to him the worst betrayal was losing their child and having the father not even find out. It seemed like this other man had known first. He questioned whether he had ever even considered him a husband, or at least a human being. Jaibon was hurt, grabbing her and asking why. Why did she do this? Had she waited to tell him everything just to make him suffer? If that was her intention, then so be it. She had ended things with him that day. The next few days passed and the weekend arrived. That morning, Jian arrived at Jia's place with little Seol to visit. He wanted them to come along to the park because he always ended up fighting with other parents, so Jia went as his supervisor. She really enjoyed spending time with Seol, while Jian just kept staring at his phone. Then Jia's phone rang, and she asked Jian to look after Seol for a moment. As soon as she left, the drama started. A kid started fighting with Seol and pushed her. Jian saw the situation and punched the kid. The boy's mother showed up furious, and Jian didn't have the tact to handle the situation properly. They started arguing, but Jia arrived just in time to stop Jian and took over, speaking to the woman. She told her that her son had pushed Seol, and, as the mother, she should apologize. If she did, then Jia and Jian would apologize as well. After the confrontation, they went home. Seol had fallen asleep, and Jia wondered if she had made a mistake. But Jian held her hand and suggested that the next day he would take her to the cinema. The next night, they went to the movies. Jia wasn't sure what to order for snacks during the movie, which seemed to offend Jian. Apparently with Haejun it had been different. When she was with him, she knew exactly what to ask for and understood him better. This made Jian wonder why she didn't want to eat with him. But after that, they continued watching the movie, and at one point Jian leaned in, seeming as though he was about to kiss her, but no, he just wanted her to focus on the movie. However, he quickly added that once the movie was over, she could kiss him as much as she wanted. After the movie, they headed to his car, and the desire for a kiss took over. They kissed passionately, giving in to their feelings. The following night, Jaebon invited Haejun and Jian to drink with him. They knew Jaebon wasn't doing well, and as soon as they saw him, they realized something was wrong. They asked if he had fought with his wife, and they hit the nail on the head. They started drinking heavily, and out of nowhere, Jaebon told them that they should never fall in love or get married because it's a disaster. But he never told them exactly what had happened. He tried to take a breather but saw a young man scratching his car. In his anger, Jaebon threatened to report him or make him pay for the damage or face jail time for 3 years. The young man started crying, saying that Jaebon had hit him. Jaebon really did want to hit him to make him feel the pain. But luckily, they didn't let him do anything he might regret later. What seemed like something simple to fix ended up turning into a huge scandal, but fortunately he was stopped before making a bigger mistake. After that, they wanted answers. What exactly was going on? Jaebon confessed that he was going to divorce his wife. The days passed, and on the runway, Ja had to deal with a very arrogant model. Kika knew exactly how to inflate this guy's ego, but Ja hated having to compliment him for being just a regular guy. The photos began, and everything seemed to be going fine until it was time to exchange watches. This model seemed very interested in the prices. Ja knew he was going to ask for a free one and accidentally blurted out that, unfortunately, all watches had to be returned to the sponsor. This made him furious, wondering when he had ever asked for a watch. After that, the guy became increasingly arrogant, acting as if he were the best. He started making Jia's life miserable by demanding that she bring him coffee. Kimbex wanted to go buy it, but this little man wanted the coffee served by a woman because apparently it tasted better that way. Thus began the torment. No coffee was ever good enough. Jia brought one after another, but then the fool managed to spill one all over the carpet. The whole place had been rented for the photo shoot, and replacing the carpet would be expensive. Chia panicked as she tried to clean it up, and the model was thrilled, telling everyone that he never wanted to work with the runway again. Soon, the boss arrived. Seeing Jia on her knees, he lost his patience. He heard that the model didn't want to work with them anymore and thought about suing him for breaching the contract and for the financial damage. He would also have to repay the ridiculous amount they paid him for his photos. Additionally, he would have to pay for the damages to the suite, including the humiliation caused to the workers. With that, Jian ended the photo shoot. But then, the agent of the celebrity model talked to Jian. The photo shoot ended without any more issues, and everyone started leaving, but Ja stayed alone with him. He told her that he was doing all of this for her because if it had happened with anyone else, he wouldn't have cared. He also told her that he had already finished his period of observing her, but before leaving he asked, "Can I have feelings for you?" After that strange question, and she was left speechless. "But then," Joming added, "let me love you." On the other hand, it had been 2 weeks since Jaibon had left the house, and he hadn't returned, even once, not even to collect his things. It seemed like Jinjung was missing him. So, that day she decided to visit her estranged husband. But when she arrived, she discovered a colleague shamelessly flirting with him. Of course, this surprised her, but she also noticed how quickly Jaibon distanced himself from the woman. When the woman invited him to drink, he told her that he would never drink alone with a woman, especially if she was married. He suggested she go out with her husband, the man she had chosen to spend her life with. At that moment, he saw his wife and asked if he was mistaken. Soon after they were talking, and she had supposedly come to check on him. This bothered him because he understood she had only come to ask when their divorce proceedings would be finalized, which was scheduled for the following week. What bothered him the most was that she seemed to genuinely want to know how he was, and that irritated him even more. They started to argue, and she remembered a similar situation when he told her to leave him alone, just for 5 minutes of peace. But then she shouted at Jaibon, saying that she should have been his priority, not his work. He asked her, "So, you cheated on me because of that?" He had worked so hard to provide economic stability for both of them. In doing so, he had acted like a fool, but that didn't justify his wife's betrayal. Both had been so stubborn that they never understood each other. Jaibon was tired. He no longer wanted her concern because it disgusted him. On the other hand, that night, Jia was excited. Joming had confessed he was in love with her, and of course with that excitement she hardly slept. The next day she went to work and ran into Jing, who had been waiting for her, just to embrace her later. She thought to herself that he had asked her to wait, but for her the timing still didn't feel right. Sometimes she thought it over. But then Yura started to bother Jia a little, because Jia was distracted and that cost Yura dearly. The boss became very harsh with her, so severe that it scared everyone. Why? Because now he had a favourite, and that was Jia. Days passed, and John went to his ex-wife's wedding. For him, it was difficult. He just wanted to see how beautiful she looked in her wedding dress and how happy she was. At that moment, she noticed his presence and without hesitation ran after him. Between them, there was a beautiful past, and John just hoped she would find true happiness. Later that night, Jia arrived home, but when she reached her apartment's entrance, she found He-jun lying there, completely drunk. The worst part was that Jo-ming wasn't home and wasn't answering his phone. Jia tried to make He-jun remember the code, but seeing how bad he was, she told him to move on. He was surprised, but still lost in his thoughts. He leaned closer to Jia, and just then, Jo-ming arrived. Seeing this, Jia pushed Jian away, and now Jian would pay for this. But Jia tried to explain to Jiamin why she had been so close to him, which excited him. It meant she had given him the green light. Jiamin became excited, because maybe she wanted to be with him as much as he wanted to be with her. And it was true, she had even bought beer to watch a movie with him. It was perfect for him, so he rushed to put Ha-jun in bed, but upon noticing that Ha-jun was interested in Jia, Guillaumin thought, "Please, don't fall for Jia." Afterward, he went directly to Jia's apartment, skipping the beer and the movie. He just wanted to know where her bedroom was. The following days, Jiamin visited the hospital where Ha-jun worked. Due to the wedding of Se-yeon, Ha-jun had been feeling down and had spent all this time with his grandmother, so Jiamin came with roses for him. After asking for him at the information desk, he waited for Ha-jun to come out. When he did, Ha-jun was surprised, and Jiamin immediately handed him the roses. Everyone started gossiping, believing the rumors that they were a couple, especially since they began arguing like they were married. Jiamin told Ha-jun, "Let's not argue today, please." Then, he took him to a beautiful restaurant, one decorated entirely in pink. Once again, they made their scene, drawing attention from everyone. Later, Jian argued with Hirachell in the car until Hirachell thanked him. It was really fun today, he said, but it was time to listen to Jian and move on. Hirachell began talking so much about Jian that Jian almost asked him if he liked her, but he didn't dare. Days passed, and when Jian stayed late at work, Jian approached her and suddenly asked, "What are we? Do you only care about my body?" Of course, he thought they were friends with benefits, but Jian wasn't interested in something like that, especially not with him, someone she had only shared a one-night experience with. Jian then put in the headphones and began to tell her about his so-called imperfections, how he had no family, and how he was jealous of his friend. When she took out the earphones, she asked, "Who is she, for you to lose your mind like this?" He begged for a chance, asking her to become his girlfriend. Later that night, Jian finally went to pick up Seoul. His mourning period was over, and as he had said before, now he had to move on. Meanwhile, Jian finally submitted the divorce petition to his wife. Now they had become strangers to each other. On the other hand, Jin Jung-han, Jaebon's future ex-wife, was talking to her so-called friend or lover. He was interested in her and wanted to know how things were going with her husband. For her, things had already reached a point where they couldn't be fixed. Then, Jaebon arrived to see her, and upon hearing the conversation, he confirmed that there was nothing to fix between them. When he saw the man, Jaebon was consumed by jealousy, because he had even read the messages they exchanged, always telling each other how much they missed each other. But then Jin Jeon asked, "What are you doing here? Didn't you say I discussed you?" The truth was, he had come here without thinking. She had only expected to see him at the court, but when she saw him leaving with that man, she couldn't calm herself. She ran to stop her and told her that they were still married, and so he ended up taking her away. However, the supposed lover understood that these two were meant for each other. Meanwhile, Jaebon's mother was having dinner with her husband when she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her stomach. Clearly, she needed to see a doctor, but before that, she would visit her children. In the following days, Jaebon's mother visited him at his office, but she was in for a big surprise when she heard about her son's situation. He was getting a divorce. However, she never found out the reason why. Jaebon only told his friend that he didn't know how to tell his mother. Upon hearing this, his mother was shocked. She walked away and Jaebon called her, but she didn't mention the topic and just hoped to see him soon. Later, she went to the Runway and found her other son, Elle, who was the ogre-like boss of the place, but she was proud of him. Then she noticed his presence, and with so much love she went to greet him. To everyone it was like seeing a mirage, something unreal. After that, she took him to a cafe. He ate a delicious cake, but soon his mother noticed he was in love. He told her it was a bit complicated. Then, from a distance, she noticed him looking lovingly at someone. His mother saw this and thought, "Mingun, your son is a man now." Days passed, and the wait for Jelming made him anxious. So one day, after running into Jia in a private place, he asked for an answer. When would she tell him if she wanted to be his girlfriend or not? She just asked for a little more time because she wasn't sure. He was too much for her, but for him that wasn't the case. To him it felt like she just wanted to play with him and only cared about his body. But that wasn't the truth. Suddenly he got closer and had the overwhelming urge to kiss her, but of course that wasn't possible in the office. Although Jia wanted an answer, he hoped she would give it to him by tomorrow. And you know what? This was actually a good thing because she would finally have to admit it. From that moment on, the desperation started. He thought, Jia likes me, but she doesn't want to admit it, so maybe he would have to resort to something childish. After making up his mind, he called Yura and asked her to have lunch with him. This surprised both Yura and Jia, but of course he wanted to make her jealous. He took Yura to a restaurant, but as soon as they arrived, he left. Now he could enjoy the meal he was paying for. After a while, he came back with a sandwich for Jia, and of course she was furious. But then he asked her, "I wonder why you're so irritated today, poor Jia." And so he continued all day, trying to talk to some of Jia's friends, who seemed to be flirting. This really bothered Jia a lot. But suddenly she couldn't take it anymore. Jiamin dragged her to the emergency exit because he wanted to know if she was jealous. Jia admitted that she was, and he just wanted her to understand that they needed to stop being friends with benefits and start being a couple. Jia simply said, "Okay." Although it was a bit cold, it was a yes, and that made him happy. Now, this handsome editor was her boyfriend. That night, Yeomin met with Haijun and began telling him that he always thought he could give him everything he wanted. But there was one thing he could never give him, and that was Jia, because he was in love with her and they had started dating. Haijun understood and was happy for him. He clarified that yes, Jia was very pretty, but he wasn't in love with her. Days passed, and madness came to the runway. On this day, Yeomin didn't hide his feelings for Jia. He even made sure to confirm that Jia was his favorite. When they asked about his girlfriend, he clearly implied that Jia was his girlfriend. Because of this, Jia tried to distance herself, wanting him to keep things private. She didn't want their relationship to be public, to avoid causing problems. But for him, there was no reason to hide it. He told her that she just had to enjoy it, and he would make sure her days were filled with joy. At this, she didn't object anymore. In the following days, the divorce proceedings for Jian and Jaebon took place, but it was very difficult for both of them. He would leave the house, but she thought about giving him the money that was rightfully his after selling it, because she didn't want to live in a place that reminded her of him. Later, Jaebon remembered the first time he saw Jian. They had a fierce argument because his car was blocking hers. She tried to stay calm, but he responded rudely, claiming that he didn't need to be so aggressive. He continued insulting her, calling her a brainless fool. Immediately, he realized she was a prosecutor and he was a lawyer, two rival professions. But after a year, he tried to win her over, even proposing marriage, making a bad joke that she was the first prosecutor he liked. It seemed like neither had changed, but why couldn't they stand each other anymore? Later, Jaebon, after drinking, could only go to his mother. He wanted her to cook something for him, and when he was ready to eat, he couldn't. He felt like a failure. Through tears, he confessed to his mother that he and Jian had separated. Days passed, and Jae and Jeon's relationship was going perfectly, always living on the edge. But on the other hand, Jaebon's mother had asked to meet with Jian. She wanted to know if she had ever bothered her. Maybe she had asked too many questions, like when they would have children. Jian clarified that she was happy with her as a mother-in-law, but Jaebon's mother wouldn't stop telling her things she knew very well. How much her son loved her. But then Jian cried because, even when Jaebon was close, she felt alone, and she hadn't been the best wife. However, there was no turning back, and all she could do was ask for forgiveness. Days later, Yeomin met with the CEO of the Runway, who cherished him as an honest man who had done impeccable work. She wanted to arrange a date for him with her daughter, Haijun. Of course, Yeomin rejected the idea, since he already had a girlfriend. She asked if it could just be one date, but he firmly refused. He offered to introduce her to a friend if she wanted, but apparently she wanted to make him her son-in-law, hoping he would marry her daughter so she could eventually hand over the Runway to him. But for Yeomin, this didn't make sense. If she considered him for his honesty, then he would be honest. Nothing she said would change his opinion. Over the days, Yeomin and Haijun went to visit Haibon since he was alone and his mother had sent him food. They arrived, and as usual, a fight began. But once they had vented, they started talking. They wanted to know the reason behind his divorce, but he never mentioned what happened. He only said that they had reached a point where they could no longer stand each other. After hours of talking, Yeomin left, and everyone was surprised because he had a date that day. Days passed, and Yeomin remained strict with everyone, determined to make everything perfect. But when it came to Jia, he complimented her, even on her outfit, saying that her boyfriend was lucky to see her every day. This made everyone curious. What boyfriend? But when Yeomin stepped out into the hallway, he bumped into a young woman. She arrogantly apologized, but he quickly realized something was off. His wallet was missing. He called out to her, and she casually pointed to it, speaking with superiority, saying that he must be very used to dealing with pickpockets. She returned it and walked off. Jomin was curious about who she was, and it turned out she was the famous daughter of Aseo Kelly, Hajun, which confused him. Why would someone like her steal? Meanwhile that night, Jinjun was drinking heavily, reflecting on how she fell in love with Jaibon. He had always been so arrogant that he even asked her to be his girlfriend with a sense of superiority. But now, that didn't matter. She still wondered why it ended this way if she loved him. She called Jaibon drunk and told him that she wanted to have a son and a daughter with him, that she wanted a family. That was why it had been so hard to lose her pregnancy. That night, she died. Jaibon arrived soon after, and she leaned into him, confessing that she had only gone out for drinks with that man. She admitted it wasn't the best behavior, but insisted she hadn't done anything wrong. Soon after, Jaibon took her to his car and decided to drive her home. But seeing how vulnerable she was, he asked if he could kiss her. Just for this once. The next morning she woke up, knowing she had called Jaibon and they had talked about something, but she couldn't remember what. She texted him, saying it wouldn't happen again. He was okay with it, suggesting it was better to keep their distance. That same morning, Jiamon arrived at work, but Yura informed him that someone was visiting his office, the daughter of Aseo. He entered, furious, and upon seeing her there, all arrogant, he warned her that he didn't like these kinds of games. He made it clear to his mother that he had a girlfriend and wasn't interested in her. But if it was something his mother wanted, he couldn't oppose it. However, for now, she could hate him if she left, and Jia entered, wanting to know what had happened. He simply responded that everything would be fine, and then he kissed her. Days later, Jia's mother visited her, bringing her food. But just as she was about to leave, they ran into Haijun in the elevator. When she saw that he was her daughter's neighbor, she became excited. He seemed like a good suitor for her daughter, so they quickly began talking. Before parting ways, he gave her his scarf so she could stay warm, which won her over. After they were alone, she asked about him, finding out he was a doctor. With that, she wanted her daughter to give him a chance, and even found it sweet that he had a daughter. But Jia was still hesitant. Her mother wanted to know who she was dating, reminding her not to focus only on looks. At that moment, Jiamin entered the elevator, and Jia introduced him as her boss. However, Jiamin quickly started criticizing Jia, only to notice that she was blushing, which made him understand the situation. From that point, he started to get irritated with Jiamin, and he realized he had made a mistake. Jia wanted to know what her mother thought of her boss, but her mother responded that she didn't like him and thought Jia should date the other guy. She said people like Jiamin with dark eyes were resentful and stubborn, carrying childhood traumas, and would make her suffer. Jia tried to explain Jiamin's true nature, but her mother just said goodbye, urging her to give the other guy a chance. The worst part of the situation was that Jiamin overheard everything. That night, Jiamin couldn't stop thinking about it. He entered the office where Sol asked him what he was thinking. He replied, "I'm thinking about her." Sol asked him what he saw when he looked into Jia's eyes, and he said her eyes were sad. This surprised Sol, especially when Jiamin asked her about Jia's father's eyes. Jia had always said her father had beautiful eyes, and Jiamin realized that his eyes conveyed darkness. That day, Jiamin went to the park, lost in thought, when Jia found him there. She wanted to know about his past, but understood that he might not be ready to talk. When she was about to leave, Jiamin stopped her and said, "Wait a little longer. In a year you'll see the difference." Then he started telling her about his past. He grew up without parents, as they died when he was 10 years old. He barely remembered their faces, and neither of his parents had siblings. He was raised by his maternal grandparents, who gave him love, but they passed away as well. Since then, he promised himself he would be successful, as that was the only thing that motivated him. He didn't want anyone to look down on him. So he went to Paris, where he had always loved fashion, clothes, and magazines. He worked day and night to achieve his goals. Eventually he got an internship at Bog, but over time he earned his place. He knew he was strict and that everyone in the office hated him, but it was the only way to get things done properly. He had always been strong, but hearing Jia's mother's words hurt him. Jia tried to calm him, telling him not to take it personally, but he couldn't help it. He believed Haijun was the best match for her. He had amazing parents who raised him like their own. He told Jia that if she was going to give Haijun a chance, now was the time. He felt that they should end things before it got too serious, because once their relationship grew stronger, he wouldn't let her go if she tried to end it. "Today is fine," he said. "Everything will be normal, and what I just said made you smile." She thought he was very confident, but now she had to make herself clear. "Jiamin, I'll be very clear with you," she said. "My mum didn't like you because she saw resentment in your eyes. But for me, this is proof of how hard you've worked. These are trophies, and I want you to be proud of them. You, and only you, fought tooth and nail to achieve your dreams. And I love your eyes. It's because of them that I fell in love with you. Stop being insecure, and let's go home and watch a movie together." After that, he stood up and said, "I gave you the opportunity, so don't change your mind." And of course, she didn't. On the other hand, Jaibon was sick at home, not knowing what to do. He felt terrible, and the only person he could ask for help was Jinjun. He called her, asking if she could help him, as the pharmacy had been closed and he had nothing to feel better. She immediately went to his house. He just wanted the pills and for her to leave, but Jinjun couldn't leave him alone. She began to take care of him, and after a few hours his fever went down. She was about to leave when he, half asleep, grabbed her and asked her to stay with him just this once because he really needed her. The next day, Haijun was at the cafe on the runway when her mother called. She wanted to know if Haijun had met the boss, Jae Ming. Haijun said yes, but that she didn't like him. Her mother was upset and wanted her to marry him because he was like her. However, Haijun wanted to meet a man whose gaze conveyed sweetness like her father's. Her mother, on the other hand, was arrogant and even despised her father. After hearing this, Haijun hung up the phone, frustrated. Then she saw Haijun enter, and she immediately took an interest in him. She decided to steal his wallet, but it ended up falling, and Jajun, who had never experienced anything like this, didn't know how to react, until Jiamin arrived and told him that the best thing to do was call the police because it wasn't the first time this had happened. Haijun apologized, asked him to leave, and told him not to ruin his life this way. Then, Yomin told Haijun right to her face that, no matter who she was, he wasn't interested in her. He had a girlfriend, so she should leave the company. But this made Haijun want to stay because she was the heir to everything. She told him that she must act this way because she felt empty inside. She wasn't justifying her actions, but she understood that there were things that money couldn't buy. Haijun then left, introduced herself to Jajun, and upon learning his name she felt happy, hoping to see him again soon. The next day, Jia had lunch with her friends and filled them in on her relationship, telling them everything about her boyfriend. To her friends, her boyfriend was so perfect it almost seemed unbelievable. But at that moment, Jiamin arrived, leaving them in shock, because he was everything and more than what Jia had described. Meanwhile, Jaebon remembered the day Jinjun stayed by his side. He had been happy, but since that day, everything had gone back to the way it was before. He recalled how he had been with his wife, forgetting important dates, even demanding that she not waste his time, telling her not to guess but to speak and leave. Do they think there is still hope for them? In the following days, Jaebon was invited by her supposed lover, Yijun, for a night out, possibly to watch a movie, see a musical, or have a meal. There were no issues now, as she was single. However, on the same day, Jaebon was planning to win her back. His friend and colleague recommended that to win back his wife's heart, he should start with flowers and soap. Jaebon went to buy sunflowers, which symbolized love and admiration. That night, as planned, Jingon was out with her charming companion Kijun, who was going to pick up the car before they left. While she was alone, she thought that perhaps with him they could make a good couple. However, despite these thoughts, she still felt empty inside. Suddenly, Jibon appeared and asked if she had time to go somewhere that night. At that moment, Kijun arrived to pick her up. He told her to get in or they'd be late. Jaebon felt bad, wondering if he should have asked before coming. Disappointed, he left, just wanting to thank her for what happened before. He left, telling her that he was right, perhaps it was best they never saw each other again. In the following days, Jaebon, as always, remembered the date of his father-in-law's death. He visited his grave and asked for forgiveness, admitting that he hadn't been a good husband and that he had divorced his daughter. A little later, he talked to his friend, feeling frustrated because he hadn't given her the flowers. He wanted to do more, but Jaebon remained silent. However, his friend said something that caught his attention. He told Jaebon that, in a relationship, sometimes you need to give in because you can't always go against the person you love. But his friend couldn't advise him properly unless he told him what had happened. Finally, Jaebon opened his heart. He confessed that he had seen his wife with her work colleague making plans together. That's why he had thrown the flowers away. His friend understood that his wife was no longer wasting time on him, and since they were no longer together, everything was over. But when Jaebon heard this, he reacted. To him, nothing was over yet. He ran after Jungon, reaching her workplace. He sent her a message, asking for just 5 minutes of her time. She wasn't willing to meet him. But Jaebon is not one to give up. He flooded her with messages, shortening the time he gave her each time. He ran to see her, but as soon as she saw him, she screamed, "Are you crazy?" She was furious and wanted to fight. Jaebon finally handed her the sunflowers and apologized, knowing he hadn't been there for her father's remembrance. He knew it wasn't easy to forgive, but at least she could accept the flowers and do whatever she wanted with them. He only wanted to give her something he had never given her before. After that, he left, leaving Jingon completely confused. She remembered that every time they fought, they would end up thinking about separating, but it never happened. Perhaps that's what was happening now. Maybe there was still love between them. Meanwhile, Jaebon's mother was at a medical checkup and received news that left her terrified. She had stomach cancer, and it was already in its 4th stage. The hardest part now was telling her family. That evening, Jaebon held a meeting with his brothers to drink, and he told them that he wanted to get back with Jingon, something that seemed crazy, but he didn't care. At that moment, Jaebon's mother called him, wanting to see them since they were drinking. She joined them soon after and saw her son so happy. She sat beside them, but suddenly she told them that Jaebon wanted to get back with Jingon. This surprised them, but she was furious. She began yelling at her son, saying that if he had behaved better, they would never have separated. Then came the moment when she had to tell them what was happening. She drank a glass of wine and suddenly told them about her cancer. She shared everything the doctor had informed her, that her illness was advanced. The only thing left to do now was to start chemotherapy as soon as possible, and she was determined not to give up. Upon hearing this, Jaebon thought it was a joke and he walked away because he couldn't process it. Jaejun followed him, and his mother knew they would have to accept it soon. But today, she at least wanted to talk to Jingon. She shared how her sons, Haejun and Jaebon, grew up in a good home, with food, clothes, and nothing lacking, but it was different for him. She had promised Moonjun, Yomin's mother, that she would raise her son as if he were her own, but she couldn't fulfill her promise. What she regretted the most was that when he studied in France, she knew he suffered due to a lack of many things, yet she still believed in his words and trusted that he was doing well. She had always wished that one day he would start calling her Mum. She was very greedy. At that moment, Joming told her it was time to go home. He took her in a taxi, and once they arrived, he got out with her. He didn't want to talk and asked her to enter the house. Seeing him so serious, she left. She was already in the elevator when Joming stopped her. She knew he was about to say something, and what she heard was Mum. Terrified, he told her not to die and not to apologize, because if it hadn't been for her, he would have been dead a long time ago. His mother was moved, hugged him, and told him to calm down, saying, "Don't worry, son, your mum won't die." After seeing his mother, he called Jia. When she came to see him, she found him very distressed. She immediately tried to cheer him up, but upon seeing his face, she understood that something was wrong. He only thought about his mother and couldn't understand why she also had to go. He begged Jia to kill him, saying he couldn't breathe and needed salvation. On the other hand, Jaebon wasn't doing well either. He arrived at Jingon's house, overwhelmed, and punished himself, saying that all of this was a punishment for being selfish. He begged Jingon for help because he wasn't okay. The next morning, the three musketeers went to the hospital to find out what was really happening with his mother and what the next steps were. The doctor tried to explain everything to them, but he didn't give them much hope. Only about a 10% chance of surviving this type of cancer. However, nothing was certain. Some patients in stage 1 couldn't survive and died, while others, even in the terminal stage, managed to extend their lives longer than expected. They had to wait and hope for a miracle. After hearing all of this, the three of them were overwhelmed, but they trusted that together they could beat cancer. That night, Jaebon went to visit his mother. But as soon as he entered, he found Jingon leaving. His mother explained that she had come to help her pack her things to take her to the hospital, as she had experience because her father had spent a lot of time in the hospital. After hearing all of this, Jaebon ran after Jingon. He wanted to know how she had found out, and she explained that she had never lost contact with her mother. She had divorced him, not her mum. After hearing this, he understood that he also needed to get closer to his mother. The next day, he arrived at his ex-mother-in-law's restaurant and, of course, she was furious. He asked for food, and although she gave him the worst service possible and even added salt to his meal, Jaebon continued eating, thinking that it was meant to hurt him. She started yelling at him, not understanding why he came to visit when he never showed up before, but he remained firm. Seeing her so upset, he kneeled before her and apologized, finally realizing how foolish he had been. On his mother-in-law's birthday, he had only given her a money envelope and told her to take it and stop bothering him. He admitted that he hated the soup she made and apologized for all the thoughtlessness he had shown toward everyone. He finally understood how wrong he had been. The next day, Jiaomin arrived at work and noticed that Jia wasn't there. He felt horrible, remembering everything he had said to her and not knowing what to say or do now. Just then, Jia walked in and talked to him as if nothing had happened. But today, Jia asked if she could work alone in her office for the day. He stayed by her side all day, following her wherever she went, but when they reached the men's bathroom, he couldn't enter. Jia was waiting for him outside. Eventually, he asked her to tell him what she thought of him following her all day. He asked, "Would you mind if I followed you everywhere, even to the women's bathroom?" Jia responded that she would feel loved. Jaemin couldn't take it anymore and left. Jia added, "I will never leave you. Even if you're angry, shout at me or push me away. I will never leave your side." Amid tears, she pleaded, "Please, boss, don't die, and never say those awful things to me again." He hugged her and asked her to forgive him, promising he would never think about death again. Days passed, and Haiyun, Io's daughter, kept insisting to Jaemin that he give her the phone number of his friend Haijun. But Jaemin had repeated countless times that she wasn't suitable for his friend and that he wouldn't give her the number. She retorted, pointing out that she was rich, from a good family, beautiful, and had a professional career. But to him she lacked the most important thing, kindness. And above all, she needed to be cured of her kleptomania. For her, this was unfair. Why was he judging her without even knowing her? But she started playing along with this game. They began to argue, and since Jiaomin never holds back, he told her that the day she became president, he would resign. He then kicked her out of his office. Outside, the gossiping Kiva X was already spreading the latest rumor. Apparently, the CEO of the company wanted her boss to be her son-in-law. This news infuriated Jia. She stormed into her boss's office, but he didn't understand what she wanted to ask. She immediately locked the door and approached him to mark her territory. After seeing his reaction, she was sure he loved her, and only her. Days later, Ha-jun was in the park with Sol when one of the children shouted at Sol, saying she didn't have a mum. Sol insisted she did, and then Jia approached. She had gone for a walk and gently held Sol. Sol called her mum, and Jia explained to her that she wasn't her mother. But Sol, being quick-witted, pointed out the child, and Jia quickly understood, winking at Ha-jun to continue this little lie. That night, Kijun was going out with Jinjun, planning to invite her to dinner. But B wasn't giving up easily. Seeing her with Kijun, he called her without hesitation and once again handed her flowers, this time red roses, symbols of love and passion. He told her he had been thinking of words he should have said to her after losing their baby. She didn't want to talk about it, but Kijun understood everything. He told her he would wait for her in his car, but Jaebon, after leaving, continued to speak, telling her that their baby was now in a better place and that none of this was her fault. Hearing this, she cried, not fully understanding why, but Jaebon did. She needed to hear those words from his mouth. That was all she needed to feel better. Seeing her cry, he approached and embraced her. Meanwhile, Jia returned home. As she got off the elevator, she saw Hajun lying at the entrance, drunk. Jia, as always, was worried and approached him, asking about Sol. He told her Sol was with her grandfather, but Jia couldn't understand why he was drinking, what was going on with him. He wanted to tell her about his mother, but it was difficult. Jia asked him not to share it if he didn't want to. But then Jian apologized, saying he was acting like a fool simply because he didn't know how to manage his emotions. This time he would willingly accept the punishment, and he ended up kissing Jia. She pushed him away, but he insisted. The worst part was that Jiamin arrived and saw everything. Jia quickly pushed him away, but Jiamin understood the situation. Jia wanted to explain and apologized for what he saw, but Jia wanted to explain and apologize for what he saw, but Jia wanted to want her apology because it wasn't her fault. Instead, he apologized on behalf of Jawn. Meanwhile, Jia wanted permission to beat him up. Of course, she could, but not to the point of killing him since he had a daughter. The next morning, the time for the judgment arrived. Fortunately, Jia wasn't the type to forget his mistakes because of alcohol. He knew he did something wrong, and Jiamin didn't want his apology. He just wanted to understand why he did it. Why the hell did he do that? That night, Jiamin hadn't come home. Even some of his belongings were missing. He was worried about the situation, and the only thing he could think of was going to see Jia to apologize. She asked him, "You know my boss and I are in a relationship, right?" Of course, he knew. He said he had drunk too much that day, but Jia wasn't satisfied with that explanation. She didn't want his apologies or excuses. If he wanted to end her anger, he needed to allow her to slap him twice. She accepted and gave him one slap for humiliating her and another for humiliating her friend. With that, she restarted his system to see if he ever thought of doing such foolish things again. He could even lose his friend over this. On the other hand, Haeun had fought with her mother. She was always insulting and humiliating her for not being like her. Haeun was fed up with this and went to a bar to drink, but unexpectedly she ran into Jiamin. When she asked for her friend's number, Jiamin gave it to her. He didn't care anymore. Jiamin thought a lot about it. Haeun had told him they were family, but did family do these kinds of things? He started talking to Haeun and shared how, at his graduation, Jian had made his family go on a trip and came alone to congratulate him. He gave him a bouquet of flowers, and how could he turn that down? But he never thought Jian would betray him like this. 4 days passed, and finally, Jian returned home. Jawn was worried, but then Jian knelt before him. He had thought a lot and came to the conclusion that he couldn't take him out of his life, but he also couldn't take Jia out. He begged Jawn to accept it and not to look for Jia anymore. Haeun approached and, hugging him, promised to do so. He deeply regretted everything. The next day, Haeun felt better. He was calm, but still tired. That's when Miss Mo arrived to see him. She found him asleep and wondered, should I kiss him? But of course that wasn't a good idea. When he woke up, she quickly ran away, embarrassed by her thoughts. On the other hand, Jiamin, the boss, was in a meeting where Jia was presenting her new idea to publish in the magazine. But suddenly, Jiamin said, "Jia, do you love me?" Everyone was surprised, and in the face of such a declaration, the boss called them slow. Jia tried to ask him not to say anything, but he could no longer separate his private life from his work life. He thought it was best for everyone to know, as it would lift a weight off his shoulders. So he publicly declared that he and Director Yu were seeing each other. After that, he left, leaving poor Jia stuck in a huge mess. She ran after him, and when she caught up, he asked her to step aside and talk for a moment. Once they were alone, he told her about his first love, Jian, Jian's sister. She was Sol's mother, but after dying in an accident, Sol became Jian's responsibility. However, when Jian and Jun told him that Jia resembled Jian, he was confused. He had never noticed it before and didn't understand if his feelings for her had developed because of that resemblance or if he was truly interested in her. He didn't want to hurt her, so he had been observing her for a while. He couldn't understand why she never asked him about it, but Jia didn't like to pressure anyone into revealing something they weren't ready to share. Then Jima told her, "You don't look like Jian. With her, I felt like dying, but with you, I want to live." Days passed, and one afternoon, Jia's mother was helping a customer in the shoe store where she worked. When the customer asked her for assistance, Jia accidentally made the woman's expensive handbag fall, causing a scratch. The woman blamed Jia for the damage and demanded that she pay 5 million won. What the woman didn't expect was that Jiamin had arrived and witnessed the injustice. He intervened, carefully examined the bag, and ended up exposing the situation. Jia's mother thanked him, but he took the opportunity to introduce himself. They had met before. He was her daughter's boyfriend. Jia's mother asked why he had come to see her, and he explained that he wanted to win her favor. He knew Jia could be with a better man than him, but if her future mother-in-law went to his workplace, everyone would likely tell her that they didn't like him. He never cared about what others thought of him, but now he wanted her to teach him how to be better. Meanwhile, Jingjon was in turmoil. Jian had confessed his feelings to her and asked her to stop being just friends and become something more, but she couldn't respond. She felt a knot in her throat and everything became clear to her. She thought she would forget everything after separating from Jaibon, but it was even harder. She thought about him day and night. Then her mother called her, and soon after Jingjon went to see her mother, or rather, Haibon. They were fighting, and neither was willing to give in, but then she heard that he came every day and her mother was fed up. Jaibon had no idea that his mother-in-law had called Jinjun. When they were face to face, they decided to sit and talk. She wanted to know what was going on with him, and suddenly he blurted out, "I love you." Jinjun didn't understand why, but he confessed that despite everything, he still loved her deeply. The next day, on the runway, Jiamin was receiving details about the new magazine. He was furious, on the brink of exploding and sending them all out. But he began to say, "I'm sorry, guys. It seems the one responsible for these aberrations is me." And so, he started teaching them everything they needed to know in order to deliver good work. Little by little, this became a great lesson for everyone, as they were very interested in his vast experience. Jia understood, and at that moment a message arrived. He was trying to be better for her. Ah, how beautiful love is. On the other hand, Seo Kelly was having dinner with her daughter Ha-jun, who couldn't understand why her mother hired such an arrogant person. The reason she hired him was exactly because he reminded her of herself. However, Ha-jun didn't see it that way. She arrived at her room, recalling the time she accidentally bumped into him at the bar. Seeing him vulnerable made her realize he was a great person. To her surprise, she got excited about the idea of winning him over for herself. Meanwhile, Ha-jun had gone out for a work dinner. As usual, they started drinking and playing a bottle game. If someone didn't answer a question, they had to drink. To everyone's surprise, it was Ms. Dummy Moon's turn. They asked if she liked anyone, and it was so obvious. She answered yes, but when the bottle spun again, it landed on her. This time they asked if the person she liked worked at the hospital. If she answered yes, they'd guess who it was because there were only 2 men in the clinic. She drank, and when the bottle spun again, it landed on her once more. She was about to drink again because it was the same question, but this time John would drink for her. Would he be her knight in shining armor? After drinking, he tried to leave, but then Dami ran after him, grabbed him, and, because he was her knight, she offered him a wish. Whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. After saying this, she ran off, leaving Jian very confused. In the following days, Jia's mother was having lunch with her co-workers. They were all around her age, so they gossip and complain about their sons-in-law. It seemed none of them had one worth praising. Just then Jiamin arrived. The old ladies, being curious, wanted to know who he was, and he introduced himself as the man madly in love with their daughter, and everyone envied him. But really, he had only come to earn points with his future mother-in-law, bringing coffee for everyone. Afterward, he left, and, of course, all the women wished they had such a handsome and attentive son-in-law. It seemed he finally earned some extra points with his future mother-in-law. On the other hand, Jinjeon was standing in front of Kijeon, but couldn't think about anything except for that, "I love you." He was about to explain to Kijeon that they couldn't be together, but before he could say anything, she stopped him. She told him not to respond now. She didn't mind waiting years for a positive answer. She only wanted to spend time with him, and so she planned a dinner for that night. As evening approached, they were about to go out for dinner, but just then Jaebon opened the car door and asked Jinjeon to get out and come with him. He wanted to take her out for something nice to eat. At that moment, Kijeon was furious. The man who had caused her so much pain now wanted to get her back. He started talking, saying that a divorce wasn't a child's game, or maybe to Jaebon, Prosecutor Chang was just a toy. It seemed he was still an idiot. He began blaming Jaebon for everything, but all of it seemed irrelevant to her. Jinjeon could no longer tolerate it, but Kijeon asked her if she was going to keep letting that fool hurt her. She didn't understand why he was reacting this way, but he told her it was because he loved her. Didn't she remember that he was her soulmate, her partner? He said his heart was broken after seeing her cry so many times. This made her think back to how he had been with her but for Jaebon. This was the decisive moment, so Jinjeon decided not to go with Jaebon. Meanwhile, Jia was with her mother. She wanted to talk about her boss and confessed that he had been visiting her and seemed to know how to keep secrets. Jia's mother was happy to hear that, but then she asked about Jiamin's parents, and everything started to go wrong. Jia told her that he didn't have parents. Her mother became upset, and Jia tried to explain that they had all passed away when he was a child. Her mother agreed, realizing that something was hidden in this man. That's why he had that look. That's why he was so dark. She then told Jia that before it was too late, she should separate from him. We began after hearing her mother's nonsense. Jia couldn't tolerate her continuing to speak ill of her boyfriend. Her mother gave her illogical reasons, like that he didn't have any family to support him, and that one day the good job he had would come to an end, and he would end up nothing. These things sounded out of place to Jia. Unfortunately, she had to put her mother in her place because she didn't know her mother was so materialistic, or did she want to benefit from her marriage? Jia reminded her that she had married a wealthy man, and what happened? He abandoned her. Money, fame, and everything else didn't matter. It was about who the person was. After this argument, Jia didn't go to work the next day and took a leave of absence. Of course, Jiamin missed her, but at that moment, Ha-jun arrived. As we saw earlier, she had become interested in Gyeomin and wanted to know what he thought of her. At first, Gyeomin thought she meant what he thought about her to introduce her to John, but she clarified that she wanted to know what he thought of her. That made him laugh. But he was furious because he really didn't understand anything. He thought of leaving, but she told him, "I wish you well," and thought about taking him somewhere unattainable. However, Gyeomin wasn't interested and asked her never to step foot in his office again. That night, John was heading home with Sol, but they saw Jia alone. Sol approached her, and although she initially seemed fine, they soon realized she wasn't. John immediately alerted Gyeomin, and soon after, Gyeomin arrived. He thought she was fine and assumed her day off had been for something fun, but soon noticed she was crying. He understood what had happened. Her mother had opposed her seeing him. Jia was crying, but Gyeomin wanted her to understand something. He was very clever and would eventually convince her mother. Jia told him, "I love him so much, boss." And he replied that he loved her too. The next day, as usual, Jinjeon went out for a run. However, that day he was surprised to see Hubo, who never did that, running just to see her. He arrived with so much energy even though he wasn't used to it, and after a short time he was exhausted. He stopped, and at that moment, Jinjeon arrived to see him. He shouted at him, asking what was wrong. Was he crazy? But Jian just wanted to do things for her because he loved her. He knew he had been a terrible husband and had made her suffer. So, he thought this time, he would take on the pain and live through what she had to suffer because of him. That's why he asked Jian to act as he wished. Now he would accept everything. Jian gave him water, and after that, Jian ran off again. Jaebon knew that this was the only way he would win her over, because he wanted to show that he was truly sorry. On the other hand, Jaya was about to kill a crazy guy who had used her card and spent millions of won on alcohol. She wanted to make him disappear because this was unforgivable. The guy opened the door and was about to escape. Just then, at the entrance, Jiamin was there. Seeing a man in his girlfriend's house, he was furious. He wanted to know who he was and gave him 10 seconds to answer. The poor guy was terrified. By the time the countdown reached 10, he screamed, "I'm Jia's younger brother." Jiamin wanted to verify this, so he asked Jia, but she denied it. She said the guy was just a thief and asked Jiamin to deal with him. After hearing this, Guillaumin had an idea. First, he wanted to know the guy's name, so he started the countdown again. "Boom," the guy said. "Jimmy knew." Guillaumin took a good look at him, then asked if he was a model or something. Jimin had tried to audition for several magazines but hadn't found any work yet. Guillaumin, seeing this, told him, "You're going to help me from now on," and took him with him. The next day, Jimin came to see his mother during lunch, but he didn't come alone. He was with Guillaumin. All of Jia's mother's colleagues were delighted, especially when Jimin told her that, thanks to his brother-in-law, he had landed a great opportunity to audition for Company X. This made Jia's mother realize that Guillaumin had just declared war. But in the end, who would win? Weeks passed, and Jaebon's mother, Hajin, wasn't doing well. The chemotherapy treatments were wearing her out, and she was reacting badly. She felt like this wasn't for her. Meanwhile, on the runway, they were taking photos for the new magazine. Today, CEO Kelly arrived and, being so arrogant, started bossing Jaya around, calling her little pig. "Jaya, over here! Bring water!" "Jaya, coffee!" Jiamin couldn't stand it anymore. Seeing Jia reduced to a servant, unable to focus on her real work, he confronted CEO Kelly in front of everyone, telling her that what she was doing was wrong. Her workers had designated jobs, not to run errands for her. This embarrassed CEO Kelly, but on the other hand, Jia was happy. She thought, "My boyfriend is the best." Later that night, Jaebon returned to visit his mother-in-law, who was completely fed up. Just that night, Jinjon arrived and saw his mother-in-law fiercely mistreating Jaebon. For some reason, he felt an immense rage, especially when he saw Jaebon cut himself on a broken plate. He screamed because he didn't understand how Jaebon could let himself be treated that way. Jinjun's mother didn't understand either. Why was Jaebon being treated like that? He had once been her son-in-law and her daughter's husband. At least she should show him some respect. They sat together and Jinjun helped treat Jaebon's wound. At that moment, Jaebon asked him not to be hard on his mother. He wondered how he would feel if his mum died. He felt like a fool for having ignored his mother's heart for so many years. He never imagined his mother would have such a horrible illness, and now he understood that she might not live for much longer. Jaebon began to cry, and Jinjun embraced him. The next day, Jiamin visited Jia, who was a bit upset with him because she found out that he always keeps things to himself, and it hurt her. Though today he wanted to apologize. He wished he had been born into a wealthy family, with great parents to care for him, with so much power that he could get rid of anyone who tried to hurt him, but he couldn't do such a thing. Jia then asked if he really considered himself an adult, because he shouldn't apologize for that, but should be proud of himself. She reminded him that, even though he doesn't have all the things he mentioned, he is wonderful just as he is. On the other hand, Jaebon was so tired, but just then his mother-in-law arrived. She didn't understand what had happened, but after hearing about the struggles in Jaebon's home, she understood that he was a great man. That day, she brought food for his mother, lightly seasoned, and food for him as well. She added that he should have faith, that all of this would pass soon. Meanwhile, Harjun was thinking about the reproaches he had made to his father. He was a doctor, and even so he failed to realize his wife was suffering. Harjun desperately begged his father to help his mother, to save her. Just then, Damyeon was about to leave the clinic when he noticed a light was still on. He entered and saw Harjun. He apologized for disturbing him, but Harjun told him he knew what to do with his wish. He asked Damyeon to be his drinking buddy for the next few days. On the other hand, Jia's mother was finishing work, but it was raining heavily. She had no choice but to go out in the rain. Just then, Jiamin arrived and gave her his umbrella. He didn't want to bother her, but simply understood that there was no greater pain in the world than losing a family member. Therefore, health was the most important thing. After that, he left. That night, Jia returned the umbrella, and her mother had left a pair of shoes for Jiamin. It seemed that Jia's mother had finally understood, and that made them both very happy. Since it was Friday, what better than to take a walk together? So they went to Busan. Being completely alone was the most pleasant thing for both of them. No one would interrupt them, at least not that night. However, the next morning, while they were having breakfast, a young man, an ex-classmate of Jia's from university, appeared. He shamelessly began flirting with her. Jia didn't know what to say, but Jiamin became jealous. He introduced himself as Jia's boyfriend and asked the man to leave. Even when the man left his card for Jia to call him any time, Jia, furious with jealousy, clarified that they came here to enjoy their time together, and Jia shouldn't be looking at other men. After this sweet remark, Jia suddenly shouted, "I really want to get married!" This surprised Jiamin. After that, Jia pretended she hadn't said anything, ignoring Jiamin's repeated questions about what she had said. Meanwhile, Jaebon was drinking with his best friend, who didn't understand why he always had to push him to achieve something. What seemed illogical was understanding why he divorced if he loved her so much. He then said, "This is the last thing I'm doing for you. Take advantage of it." Just then, Jinjun arrived, as this best friend was Jinjun's brother. He left them alone, and Jaebon, lost in thought, hadn't prepared anything and didn't know what to say. However, the alcohol helped, and they talked between drinks until Jaebon was completely drunk. Seeing this, Jinjun decided to take him home. He wanted to ignore it, leave him as he was, but couldn't. He changed his clothes to make him comfortable, though when he saw him like this, he didn't understand if it was the alcohol or something else. He looked so handsome. He tried to ignore it, but at that moment Jaebon reacted, grabbed him and threw him onto the bed. He had wanted this for a long time. He told Jinjun he would give him enough time to ask him to stop, but after that he wouldn't. Jinjun didn't have the strength to fight against his heart. Finally, there was reconciliation. The next day, Seo Kelly and her daughter Harjun arrived at the Runway, waiting for the chief editor. Just then Jia arrived, and once again they asked her to bring coffee. As she approached, Seo Kelly expected Jia to apologize, and Jia understood it was for what happened before. She had no choice but to bow to her. However, to the bad luck of these women, Yomin, the chief editor, arrived. Seeing this, he ran over to Harjun, demanding she apologized for the time she stole his wallet. Harjun tried to explain that it was going to fall, but Yomin had no mercy. When he saw she wouldn't apologize, he forced her to bow before him, and her mother didn't defend her. After that, Seo Kelly ordered them to leave. Jia felt a bit sorry for Harjun, but couldn't do anything about it. Seo Kelly was surprised by Jiomin's actions, not understanding why he was so determined to ruin her reputation at the company, but it wasn't that, he just hated injustice. Then Kelly understood. He defends editor Yu because she's his girlfriend, right? Jiomin didn't deny it, and since there was nothing at work that prevented them from being together, he didn't feel the need to explain. This disappointed Kelly, but Jiomin didn't care. He knew he had so much influence, even in France, and warned her that if anyone dared to touch his girlfriend, he'd ruin their life. Meanwhile, Harjun was angry with herself for almost being swayed by that man. When she saw him so vulnerable that day, she thought he was a good person and that they could heal their wounds together. But he was nothing like she thought, just a piece of trash. On the other side, Jiamin was waiting for CEO Kelly to leave his office. She got to her car and there she waited for her daughter, who was crying. Her mother told Hajun that if she wanted editor Yomin, her mum would give him to her. Meanwhile, at the clinic, Damian was about to inform Hajun that he was going home, but he tripped and Jian helped him. At that moment, he offered to take Damian home. Later, Jinjun was leaving work when Kijun asked if he could accompany her somewhere to talk. She agreed, but just as they were planning where to go, Jaibon appeared. Once again, he opened the car door, asking Jinjun not to leave with Kijun, to stay and go somewhere together. Kijun didn't understand, but Jinjun took the opportunity to ask if she was willing to get to know him better. Jaibon, feeling jealous, was going crazy. However, Jinjun understood. He grabbed Jaibon by the shirt and told Kijun that this germ of society was a headache-causing bacteria, but at the same time it was beneficial. He apologized but knew that this germ would never be able to get out of his life, and now he was ready to give this germ a chance. That was the right thing to do for his heart. Weeks passed, and Hirachell accompanied her mother to a medical checkup. It seemed that they would need to change her medication since it wasn't working. However, her mother decided to stop chemotherapy, asking how much time she had left. Later that day, Hirachell went to see Yomin, who was standing in the rain. Jomin ran over with an umbrella, not understanding what was happening. Then it was announced that her mother was about to quit. She was going to abandon them from that moment on. They wrote to Jaibon, telling him that together they needed to give her a reason to keep living. Jaibon immediately called Jinjun, asking for help with a compassionate lie. Meanwhile, Tammy was about to go out for drinks with a friend, but just then Jian arrived and asked her to grant him one more wish, even though it might seem selfish on his part. At the same time, Jiamin arrived to see Jia, who was supposedly still working but was actually watching a soap opera. Jiamin was startled by this, but then his boss told Jia that it was time for her to meet his mother. That same night, the three ladies arrived at the door of the mothers of these three wonderful men. They all called her Mother. And she was so surprised, they gave her flowers and each introduced themselves. Except for Jian, of course. His mother was very surprised. At least they could have warned her they were coming. Quickly she ran out, and after a few hours she got ready and prepared a grand dinner for everyone. She was so happy to meet her son's girlfriends. Domi told her that she had just started dating Hajun, and Sol was already calling her Mum. Although Domi was sweet and liked the idea, the most important thing for her was to see her son's happiness. Just then, Jae shared a piece of news that surprised everyone. Jinjun was pregnant. It sounded excessive, but it made his mother so happy. Jinjun asked her to please stay healthy so she could enjoy her grandchild, and this was more motivation for her and for all three of her beautiful sons. Days later, Jinjun couldn't believe it. The reconciliation with Jaibon had led to an absolute truth for their compassionate lie. God was blessing them, giving them a second chance because she was pregnant. Meanwhile, his relationship with Hajun and Jomon was improving. However, Jomon still feared that this fool might continue pursuing Ja. Still, Hajun opened his eyes and told him that it seemed like Ja did have someone in her life, Ms. Damion, who was crazy about him. On the other hand, Chun was feeling terrible. She felt so lonely and, whenever she had the chance, tried to steal something. However, they soon realized it, and this time, it wasn't just anyone. She had stolen from an important businessman, a known associate of her mother. Her mother quickly approached, but Jawn called her Mum, which left the businessman stunned, making him wonder, is this woman really the daughter of the CEO? That same day felt like a call from God, or something that happened to bring them to a date on the building's rooftop. Everything was perfect. Jia and Guomin were enjoying their time together. However, Jia suddenly saw that Hajun was about to jump off the building. Hajun was so frustrated with her life, remembering the horrible words from her mother. With every word she heard, she wanted to leave this world. But before making that crazy decision, Jiomon saved her. He asked Jia to call the CEO immediately and tell her that her daughter urgently needed to see a psychiatrist. What seemed like a heroic moment would soon turn into a nightmare. Jian was upset, hurt, and filled with a desire for revenge against Jian. How dare he save her? The next day, Jian met Jaibon for lunch. Not knowing where to start, she bluntly told him that she was pregnant. She showed him the 3 tests she had taken, and seeing this, Jaibon was overwhelmed with joy. He was so happy it felt like a dream. He ended up holding her and spinning her around. Today he was the happiest man in the world. Kneeling before her, he vowed to work hard for both of them. It seemed that everyone deserved a second chance, and now they had theirs. Meanwhile, at the clinic, Jian was about to leave when Domi bravely asked to talk to him privately. She began by telling him that today marked the 3rd anniversary of her one-sided love for him, a love that he knew she had. How sweet! On the other hand, Jaibon was talking to his best friend, who also happened to be his brother-in-law. He learned that Jaibon was so lucky he was about to become a father. But the worst part was hearing that Jaibon and Jinjon would get married again. To his brother-in-law, it sounded like a bad joke, but now he could honestly say that love had completely driven him mad. Elsewhere, Jiamin was leaving work when he ran into Jian. She grabbed him and wanted to talk, but he was always cold toward her. Still, he listened to what she had to say. When she said nothing more, he told her it wasn't necessary to thank him. He understood, and then walked away, leaving her completely furious. Later, he met his mother, who was excited to visit him. She asked if her wig looked good, and of course he agreed, but then she asked her son if he was planning to marry Jia. He barely knew her, but he knew she was a good girl, and even though it might be a little too soon, Jia had already thought about it. His mother was happy to hear this because she hoped they would advance their wedding plans since she wanted to be close to her son. That day, Jiamin began to plan everything, but he asked the wrong person for help, Jiamin, the office gossip. Jiamin wanted to know what the most beautiful marriage proposals had been, and he promised to help Jiamin if he gave him an expensive watch. And so, the plan for the proposal began. On the other hand, that night, Dee realized that ever since he confessed his feelings to Jian, he had become more distant and uncomfortable. Dee would talk to him, but in reality she didn't expect a response. She felt embarrassed for making him feel that way. Jian, in a rude manner, didn't understand why she wanted to make him uncomfortable. He had decided to tell her, but recommended that it would be better for her to find another man, because he wasn't looking for a partner, and so he left her. The next day, Kivvex was enjoying the watch his boss had given him, but suddenly it was taken from him. Nothing that his boss had given him was of use. If he wanted it back, he had to give something good in return. That's when Kiv realized his boss was planning to propose to Jia and was looking for the perfect proposal idea for her. The first plan was to take her to such an expensive restaurant that it seemed his boss would go broke. At the moment, the boss went off to prepare everything, but just as he left, a couple got engaged, apparently with the ring hidden in a cake. Jiamin arrived and asked what had happened. Jia told him what occurred, disapprovingly, feeling it was such an obvious, childish and insignificant proposal. Hearing this, Jiamin felt crushed, so he left again and cancelled the proposal just in time. In his next attempt, Jiamin took Jia to a basketball game, something neither of them liked. They were sitting there, freezing, when out of nowhere a couple got engaged. Just by seeing Jia's disgusted face, Jiamin understood she didn't like it either. Jia thought it was horrible to be so showy. Once again, Jiamin rushed to cancel everything, just in time because Jia almost caught on. Then came the third attempt. This time, he took Jia to a beautiful yacht. He was sure this time it would work. Everything was prepared, but Jia was freezing, and Jiamin couldn't give her his coat because the engagement ring was already there. Jia got upset because if he wasn't cold, why couldn't he give her his coat? And since he wouldn't, Jia wanted to leave the yacht immediately. Days went by, and Jia, meeting with his brothers, overheard Jabon mocking Jiamon for not knowing his girlfriend's preferences. In the middle of it all, an elderly woman interrupted them. She gave Jian a smack, and seeing the others mocking, she scolded them too. But then she wanted to tell them something. Overcomplicating things is foolish. They simply needed to be themselves, not letting others influence them with their words. They just had to do what their hearts told them. For Jian, this was eye-opening. Without wasting another moment, he ran out of there, realizing what the kind old lady had been talking about. That same evening, Jawa was at a family dinner with her uncles, her brother, and her mum. Everyone was already convinced about Jian, especially her brother, who spoke highly of him. Her aunt found it strange that Jo's mum had accepted him. She thought she would have looked for a doctor or something like that. Just then, Jian arrived, and Jao's mum told her that of course he could have studied that. But he's good at what he does. No one understood what he was doing there, but after quickly apologizing, he approached Jia. Although he didn't know how to start or express all the feelings he had for her, he began by telling her that he simply hadn't managed to come up with a beautiful proposal for her, but that he loved her with all his heart. He asked her to marry him, and everyone agreed. Jia, without thinking twice, threw herself into his arms, so happy to be in his life. She asked him to repeat what he had said, but in French. After that, Jia responded with, "I do." In the end, the beautiful Jian won over his mother-in-law, and she was thrilled. The next day, everyone in the office found out that Jia and the boss were getting married, and, of course, Kievex needed his payment, his watch. But there was no way he was giving it up. Even though Kiev never gave up, he eventually convinced him. On the other hand, Editor Choi was happy for Jia and just asked her to be very happy. But in the distance, amidst all this happiness, Haijun was consumed by her desire to make that man miserable. In the coming days, Jian arrived at the office and was surprised to find that Haijun was now going to be in charge of the runway. As she had warned before, she called the boss and put him on speakerphone during a meeting, asking what was going on. Haijun explained that her daughter would now handle everything, but Jian told her that in that case he would have to leave because he didn't plan to work for a thief. Haijun was humiliated, especially when her mother told her to leave because she still couldn't do without the services of the chief editor. This was clear for Haijun. This man who seemed kind, even suffering, was nothing more than a fool who looked down on her as much as, if not more than, her own mother. She was filled with hatred, so much so that she wanted to kill him. From that day on, Haijun lived in hell. She ate excessively and became more violent. Meanwhile, the beautiful couple, Jian and Jia, enjoyed their time together, even taking care of Sol. For Jian, it was now time for them to go together to search for and design her wedding dress. The next night, Haijun was lost in alcohol. She had hired someone to kill Jian, and it seemed the job would be easy. They had him in sight, and as long as she deposited the full amount, they would do the job. And, of course, she did. A truck was following Jian, who was driving and talking to Jia. They had agreed that he would pick her up from work, and he was only about 5 minutes away when he noticed it started snowing, and it was beautiful. Since it was Friday, they wanted to go for a walk, and everything seemed perfect, until the truck accelerated, and Haijun ordered them to hit him and finish him off. The truck did just that. Jian suffered a huge blow, and it made him fall off the bridge. Meanwhile, Jia was happy, but she felt like she had been waiting too long. The time passed and Jian was fighting for his life. He was in surgery, and for Jian it felt like a game. He had wished so many times to die and be with his parents, but now that he wanted to live and spend happy times with Jia, it seemed like he wouldn't achieve it. It appeared that being happy wasn't his destiny. Jia arrived just after hearing the news and couldn't even comprehend what had happened. Haijun quickly explained to her that Gyeomun had been in a traffic accident, but Jia was still unsettled. Jae-ban was at the police station investigating, but Jia couldn't stay calm. She couldn't even say this was real. After the surgery, Gyeomun was left in a coma, and Jia, along with Sol, stayed by his side. Meanwhile, Jia was talking to Jae-ban. Apparently this had been planned. The truck didn't have a license plate, and then it fled. They decided not to tell Jia's mother because she was already suffering so much from her illness, and it seemed like the best option. Jia was lost. She didn't know what to do or how to help him. Sol was scared, seeing her dad not wake up, and Jia told her that he was probably dreaming of his parents to tell them he was going to get married. But thinking about the possibility that he might never wake up broke her heart, and she couldn't stop crying. Meanwhile, Jiamin was still between life and death, and Jae, who had just arrived to see him, asked about his family, his little Sol, and everyone was fine. But when he asked about his mother, Jiamin asked him to help her, as she was very sick and everyone needed her. Then, Jia asked about Jia and how they were. As he heard the words from Jia and her family telling him to wake up, Jia held him and told him he shouldn't stay there, he had to go back, and with that, Jiamin disappeared. The next moment he found himself in Paris, a time when he had to do thousands of jobs just to survive. He always told his mum he was fine, that he didn't need anything. But deep down, there was a lot he didn't have. He would tell himself, just hang in there because one day you will be happy. On the other hand, Jia's mother arrived and found her daughter asleep. She took the opportunity to tell Jiamin to stop causing problems and wake up, because everything would get better if he returned. She just asked him to come back, and so Jiamin found himself in that same place, in his dream. He didn't understand what was happening, but at that moment his parents finally arrived to see him. They knew he had faced many problems after they left him, but now they could finally be together. Jiamin felt like a child again. He remembered his parents, and for the first time in many years, he saw their faces again. Meanwhile, Seo Kel arrived to see her daughter. Haijun told her that the editor, Yu Ming, had suffered an accident caused by a truck without a license plate. She wanted to know if her daughter was involved. Jia-jun asked, "Did he die?" Haijun replied, "I was scammed. They told me he would die if I paid them 100%. After hearing this, Kelly fainted. She couldn't believe what her daughter had done. The days passed, and Haijun's mother and Jia-jun arrived at the hospital. They were informed about the results of the tests, and as the doctor had always said, trust in miracles. The medication was finally showing results. It could be the medication or a miracle, but everything would be fine. They gave them hope, though she would have to continue with chemotherapy. For all of them, hearing this was a great relief. While all this was happening, Jiamin was living in a dream, enjoying being with his parents, remembering his family, and even experiencing things he never had the chance to do with them when they were alive. But while he lived this way, Jia suffered. She barely ate and had no energy for anything. She just wanted to be with him, waiting for him to wake up. 10 days had passed, and he still hadn't woken up. The wait seemed endless. But today, Kiv Vex had returned his watch. He felt guilty and thought, this watch is lucky. Maybe if I return it, he will wake up. Jae begged Jiamin one last time to wake up so they could be happy together. Meanwhile, in his dream, Jiamon looked at the stars with his parents. But when Jia placed the watch on his wrist, it appeared in his dream, and he remembered everything. His parents started telling him it was time to leave, but they wanted him to know that he had never been alone. They asked him to close his eyes and then open them, and he saw his past, how his 2 crazy siblings, Jaebon and Haijun, took care of him during his illness, maybe not to cure him, but they tried not to let him die. They were always there for him. He had never lacked a mother's love. He had to remember that his mother had chosen him as her favorite child among her 3 children. That's why his parents wanted him to understand that he was always surrounded by beautiful people. He was never alone. And now he could see how many people loved him and how many wanted him to return. Jiamin saw Jia so thin, and he became worried. But his parents told him that his place was not with them, that he still had so much to live. He had to go. But they asked him never to forget that he was never alone and that he never had a sad life. They hoped that one day, in the distant future, they would meet again. With that, Jiamin left, not before telling them that he was going to get married and there would always be a place waiting for them. Shortly after, Jiamin moved his hand. Jian saw him and notified everyone. It seemed unreal, but Jian finally woke up. He saw them all, and everyone was so happy, especially Jia, as the love of her life had finally woken up. On the other hand, Haijun's mother was resting, but in the middle of her sleep, Jian visited her. He approached her and asked her to stay healthy for a long time and that he loved her. She woke up crying, but she would fulfill it. Then, her precious son, Jian, arrived to see her and told her that he had finally returned home. Later, Jian spent time with Jia. Finally, the worst had passed, and there was nothing in this world that could separate them. Now they would always be together. They fell asleep together, but in the middle of the night, Jian woke up, left Jia sleeping, and went to see Jaibon, who was, as usual, fighting with Seoul. But there, Jian wanted to bring his family back together, and he wanted a drink. Obviously, everyone refused. But why not a glass of juice? He wanted to tell them he had had a very long dream. He couldn't remember exactly what had happened, but when he woke up, he felt that something had been released within him. He confessed that he had always been so envious of Haijun. He had always achieved great things, and Jian would think about what he had done wrong to be born the way he was. He thought no one was by his side, and that's why he was alone. However, his family had always been right in front of his eyes. They had always been there for him. Hearing this, Jia felt happy. Finally, Jian understood. Days passed, and at Seo's house, a maid rushed into Miss Haijun's room to inform her that her mother wasn't opening her eyes. Haijun panicked and quickly ran to check on her mother. She found her lying on the floor with a bottle of liquor. She asked them to call an ambulance. A few hours later, Jian found out what had happened. Seo was in the hospital due to a pill overdose, and at least he was able to visit her. He asked her to wait for him, and he entered. Jian talked to Haijun as if nothing had happened. He told her about his accident and how the runway seemed to have some sort of curse, but he told Haijun to be patient. Her mother would get better soon. He was about to leave when Haijun said, "What happened wasn't an accident. I did it." Jian lost his mind when he heard this. She even told him that money could also be used to kill people. She confessed that her mother had found out what she had done, and that was why she was like this. She said that her existence was the curse for everyone. He threw the basket of fruit he had brought, but he wanted to know why she had done this to him. She didn't think to apologize. To her, he was just trash that needed to be discarded forever. He couldn't understand what harm he had caused, and it was all because he hadn't let her die. At that moment, Jia, who had overheard everything, entered, grabbed Haijun and slapped her hard. Haijun threatened to fire her, but Jia didn't care. It still wasn't enough, and she slapped her again and again. She made it clear. That day, you didn't just try to kill a man. You tried to take away a precious son from a mother fighting cancer. You tried to take away a father from a little girl. You almost caused a great guilt in her older brother. You tried to take away someone's most precious friend, and that day, you were going to take away the person with whom you promised to be together forever. And still, you feel no guilt. After that, Jia warned her, "You will never be at peace. I hope you turn yourself in for what you've done." From that day on, they left the runway behind. But one day, Jian received a call from Bogs Paris to work there. 6 months passed, and it seemed Haijun had turned herself in. However, with the lawyers and money they had, she would only serve 6 years in prison, with the possibility of early release for good behavior. On the other hand, Jian told Jaebon that he had decided to go to Paris with Jia after their wedding. They would still visit often. Meanwhile, Jiajun had learned that being rejected hurt more than rejecting, because when he carefully observed Miss Mon, he realized he was interested in her. So that day, while they were drinking, and especially when they were alone, John acted gallantly toward her. Seeing this, Domi wasted no time and quickly asked him if he was interested in going to the cinema with her that Saturday. Jiajun clarified that he was a father, and she knew that his priority would always be his daughter, which was logical to her. Jiajun even told her that he had once left someone he loved deeply because his parents didn't accept the idea of him already having a daughter, but Domi didn't mind. Jian made excuse after excuse until Domi confronted him, handing him a necklace that was a key. She gave it to him as a promise. If obstacles arose in the future, they would face them together. After that, there were no doubts. She was the one. Jian then invited her to the cinema. Weeks passed, and finally, the wedding of Jia and Jiamin arrived. The mother of the three musketeers was healthier and in better condition. On the other hand, the divorced exes were still fighting, but now because Jian had become overly protective. Meanwhile, Domi was happier than ever with Jian. Now their relationship was real. But finally, the long-awaited entrance of the newlyweds, Jiamin and Jia, arrived. They entered as elegant and dazzling as usual. They bowed in front of their parents, and Jia's mother was more than happy with the lovely and extravagant son-in-law her daughter had chosen. On the other hand, they also thanked Jiamin's parents for raising him, and there, at last, were the seats for Jiamin's parents. Although they were not present in body, they were there in spirit. There was nothing left to do. The wedding was breathtaking. Even the sun treated them to a beautiful song. And so, the photo session began. Photos of all of them looking more than happy. Photos that showed that behind every situation there is a solution. But most of all, they demonstrated that bond that only a true family can have. As the days passed, the newlyweds travelled to Paris. Jia started studying French. It was difficult for her, but living in such a magical place was perfect, especially with the man she loved by her side. Her next goal was to find a job. Meanwhile, Jiamin, her hero, rescued her from pickpockets, as always. And since he had just helped her, how about Jia paying him back with a drink? Thank you for listening to the story. If you enjoyed, please give it a like, and subscribe if you want to see more manhwa recaps. Let me know what stories you'd like to see next. And one last big thank you to everyone that left some really nice words of encouragement and really kept me motivated to keep posting these stories for everyone to enjoy. Until next time, bye-bye.